The first pile wasn't impressive. That was the funny part. Years later, people talked about mountains, empires, fortunes, truck fleets. But the first pile barely reached the fence. Ethan Carter remembered standing beside it when he was 17 years old. A single dump truck from Mason County Cannery backed up to the edge of his father's field and unloaded several tons of corn husks, cobs, stock fragments, and processing leftovers. The driver climbed out. "Where do you want the next load?" Samuel Carter looked confused. "Next load?" The driver nodded. "We've got plenty." That turned out to be the understatement of the decade. The cannery processed sweet corn, thousands upon thousands of tons every year. And every ton produced waste. Husks, soaks, cobs, leaves, piles of material nobody wanted. For years the company paid to haul it away. Then someone noticed the Carter farm sat only half a mile away. A conversation happened. An agreement followed. And suddenly the waste started arriving there instead. Samuel accepted immediately, mostly because free organic material sounded useful. At least in theory. Nobody knew what to do with it. But farmers rarely rejected free resources. The trucks kept coming, day after day during harvest season, week after week, year after year. The piles grew larger, then ridiculous. By 1985, the waste piles stretched along hundreds of yards of field edge. Steam rose from them during cool mornings. Birds gathered around them. The smell drifted across neighboring farms. The county immediately started making jokes. Naturally, Dale Harper created most of them. "You know what Samuel's growing now?" Rick Harlow looked up. "What?" "Corn garbage." Laughter spread across the co-op. Samuel kept drinking coffee, ignoring them, mostly, but privately. He started noticing things. Grass grew greener near the piles. Soil looked darker. Crop yields improved slightly in nearby sections. Not dramatic, just noticeable. Enough to be interesting. One evening, he stood beside the piles with Ethan. Steam rose from decomposing corn waste beneath orange sunset light. Samuel kicked the dark material with his boot. "Look at this." Ethan looked down. The lower layers no longer resembled corn husks. They looked like soil. Rich, dark, alive. Samuel smiled. Nature's doing something. At the time, neither understood exactly what. But the observation stayed with Ethan, especially because the piles never stopped growing. By the time Ethan inherited the farm in 1992, the cannery had been delivering waste for nearly 15 years. 15. Most people considered it a nuisance, an eyesore, a smell problem, the county's largest collection of rotting corn. The Carter farm sat on rolling Midwestern ground surrounded by conventional operations. Corn, soybeans, cattle, predictable things, reasonable things. Nobody built businesses around agricultural waste. Nobody, except Ethan Carter apparently. The idea arrived accidentally, as most important ideas do. One rainy spring afternoon, Ethan got stuck. Literally. His tractor sank into wet ground while spreading fertilizer. For 3 frustrating hours he fought mud, chains, and increasingly creative language. Finally he climbed off and walked toward one of the old corn waste piles nearby, mostly because he needed a place to sit. The pile towered above him now. Years of deliveries stacked together. Steam drifted upward despite cool weather. Ethan grabbed a handful absent-mindedly, then stopped, because what filled his hand wasn't waste. Not anymore. It looked like premium compost. Rich black material. Better than anything he'd ever purchased. He stared at it, then grabbed another handful. Then another. The rain continued falling. But Ethan barely noticed. Because suddenly, something didn't make sense. Again, that evening Emily Carter walked into the kitchen and immediately froze. Maps, notes, soil reports, agricultural magazines. Everything covered the table. Ethan looked up. "Oh." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Dangerous word. Very dangerous. What are you doing?" Long pause. Then, "Thinking." Emily said slowly. "What kind of thinking?" He pointed toward the window, toward the giant composting piles visible beyond the barn. Silence. Then, "Corn garbage." Emily groaned immediately. "Oh no." 3 months later, Ethan drove to an agricultural conference. Then another. Then another. He read everything he could find about composting, organic matter, microbial activity, nutrient cycling, commercial soil amendments, waste conversion systems. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became, because companies everywhere paid enormous money for compost. Landscapers, nurseries, greenhouses, golf courses, organic farms, garden centers. Everybody wanted it. Meanwhile, Ethan sat on what appeared to be a nearly endless supply of raw material. Free raw material. That bothered him. Because if something was valuable, why was nobody treating it like it mattered? The answer arrived one afternoon at the county co-op. Dale Harper sat drinking coffee, while Ethan studied a stack of compost industry reports. Dale looked over. What are you reading? Compost. Silence. Then. No. Yes. No. Yes. Dale pointed toward the papers. You mean dirt? Ethan looked up. Not dirt. Rotting plants. Close. Rick joined the conversation. What are you doing with compost? Long pause. Then, thinking. The room immediately became nervous. Because everybody knew that look. The one Ethan got before strange ideas. Dale folded his arms. What kind of thinking? Ethan smiled slightly. The kind you're gonna hate. 6 months later, trucks started arriving. Not Cannery trucks. Equipment trucks. Screening machines. Loaders. Conveyors. Composting equipment. The county lost its mind. People drove past the farm just to stare. Dale actually parked beside the road one morning and watched workers assemble machinery. Then climbed out. No. Ethan looked up from a clipboard. Morning. Dale pointed dramatically. No. Ethan followed his finger. What? The garbage. Silence. The garbage? Dale spread his arms. You bought machines for garbage. Ethan smiled slightly. Compost. No. Yes. No. Yes. The first months felt terrifying. Because equipment cost money. Fuel cost money. Labor cost money. Everything cost money. Meanwhile, the compost business produced exactly $0. For a while. Then one afternoon, a landscaping company called. Then a greenhouse. Then a nursery. Then another. Small orders. Nothing major. But enough to be interesting. Very interesting. One autumn morning, Ethan stood beside a freshly screened pile of finished compost when a black pickup truck rolled into the yard. A man climbed out wearing expensive boots and a pressed field jacket. Not local. Definitely not local. He walked straight toward the compost pile. Picked up a handful. Examined it carefully. Then smiled. A real smile. Not a polite one. The kind people make when they've just found something valuable. Then he looked at Ethan and asked, How many tons of this can you make? Ethan stared at the man for several seconds. Because nobody had ever asked that question before. Not once. Most people asked why he was composting. Why he kept taking corn waste. Why he spent money on screening equipment. Why he built giant piles of rotting plant matter. Nobody asked how much he could produce. The stranger held another handful of compost. Dark. Rich. Perfectly screened. He rubbed it between his fingers. Then looked up again. Well, Ethan shrugged. Depends. The man smiled. On what? How much you need? That answer made the stranger laugh. A real laugh. Not a polite business laugh. The man's name was Henry Lawson, owner of a regional landscaping supply company serving 3 states. He supplied nurseries, commercial developments, municipal parks, golf courses, and increasingly, homeowners. The compost market had exploded during the early 1990s. Demand kept growing. Good compost remained difficult to find. Henry pointed toward the enormous windrows stretching across the Carter property. How long have you been making this? Ethan looked toward the piles. 15 years. Henry blinked. 15. Ethan nodded. Yes. Long pause. Then why am I just hearing about it? Silence. Then, because everybody thought it was garbage. The answer stayed in the air for a moment. Then Henry laughed again. That afternoon turned into 4 hours. Then 6. Then nearly the entire day. Henry walked the operation. Studied the process. Asked questions. Lots of questions. Moisture management. Turning schedules. Nutrient levels. Screening systems. Raw material sources. Everything. By sunset, he stood beside Ethan looking over the property. Steam rose from compost windrows beneath orange evening light. Finally, Henry folded his arms. I'd like to buy some. Ethan nodded. How much? Henry named a number. Silence. Absolute silence. Because Ethan thought he misheard him. Surely. Then. Tons. Henry smiled. Yes. Long pause. All at once. Yes. The order exceeded every compost sale Ethan had made combined. Combined. For the first time since starting the business. The numbers looked real. Very real. The next 6 months changed everything. Henry returned. Then returned again. Then brought other buyers. Landscape suppliers. Greenhouse operators. Garden centers. Municipal grounds departments. People kept arriving. And they all said roughly the same thing. Where have you been hiding this? That question always made Ethan smile. Because the answer was simple. He wasn't hiding. People simply weren't looking. The county finally started paying attention. Naturally. Because outsiders arriving with checks tends to get noticed. One morning Dale Harper drove into the farmyard and stopped, then stared longer. Because 3 tractor trailers sat beside loading areas waiting for compost shipments. Workers moved constantly. Loaders filled trailers. Screening equipment hummed. Dust drifted through sunlight. Dale climbed out slowly. No. Ethan looked up. Morning. Dale pointed toward the trucks. No. Ethan followed his finger. What? The dirt. Silence. The compost. Dale folded his arms. You sold dirt. Ethan smiled slightly. Yes. Long pause. People bought it. Yes. More silence. Then. Why? That answer took longer. Because Ethan could have explained microbes. Organic matter. Nutrient retention. Water holding capacity. Soil structure. All true. Instead he pointed toward a nearby field. What grows there? Corn. And what grows without soil? Silence. Dale stared. Then looked annoyed. Which usually meant Ethan made a good point. The cannery noticed too. Especially after accountants started reviewing hauling costs. One afternoon Harold Briggs from Mason County Cannery arrived at the farm. He stepped out of a company truck and looked around. The operation had expanded dramatically. Screening yards. Storage areas. Equipment sheds. Employees. Loading stations. Everything looked bigger. More organized. More professional. Harold shook his head. You know something? Ethan looked up. What? For 15 years we paid people to remove this stuff. Silence. Then. Sounds expensive. Harold laughed. Very. He looked toward a massive pile of finished compost. Then toward another. Then another. You build all this from corn husks. Ethan thought about it. Then shook his head. No. Harold frowned. No. Ethan pointed toward the compost. The microbes did. That answer somehow irritated Harold too. By 1998 the operation became the largest compost producer in the county. Then one of the largest in the region. The cannery's waste never stopped arriving. Every harvest season trucks rolled through the gates. Load after load. Day after day. The same material everyone once called garbage. Only now people saw it differently. Because now it had a price. Funny how quickly opinions change once money appears. The biggest surprise came from local farmers. At first they mocked the idea. Then ignored it. Then questioned it. Then wanted it. One by one they started buying compost from Ethan. Some purchased a few loads. Others purchased dozens. Crop performance improved. Soil organic matter increased. Water retention improved. Fields handled drought better. The results became difficult to ignore. One spring afternoon Rick Harlow stood beside a compost spreader watching dark material flow across a field. He looked toward Ethan. You know what bothers me? Ethan smiled. What? Rick kicked at the soil. I laughed at this. Yes. No, seriously. He shook his head. For years. Wind moved across the fields. The compost spreader continued working. Dark material disappeared into the soil. Rick stared at it. Then laughed. You build a business from corn trash. Ethan looked toward the horizon. Rolling farmland stretched beneath bright blue skies. Then he smiled slightly. Not trash. Long pause. What then? Ethan bent down and picked up a handful of finished compost. Rich black material crumbled through his fingers. Then he looked at Rick. Future soil. That answer stayed with him. Years later people told stories about Ethan Carter's compost empire. About truck fleets. About contracts. About millions of pounds of material. About mountains of compost. But Ethan always thought they missed the important part. The important part happened long before the business. Long before the equipment. Long before the customers. It happened when everyone else looked at a pile of corn husks and saw waste. Because sometimes the difference between garbage and opportunity isn't the material. It's the person looking at it. For 15 years the cannery dumped corn waste beside the Carter farm because nobody wanted it. Then one farmer looked closer. And the county's biggest pile of trash became black gold.